Now we look at principles for situations of conflict. As a basic principle of natural law, one of the primary precepts of natural law is that we should do good and avoid evil. A corollary of that precept, corollary means that you change the way you say that without losing the meaning. So, a corollary of the above principle is that we may never do evil in order to accomplish good. Right? So again, we have to do good and avoid evil. Another way of saying that is never do evil in order to accomplish good. Now, there are times, though, we have to act and we have to do good, but evil effects also follow as a consequence. So, in those cases, how should we act? So, one of the ways we address a situation like that is with the principle of double effect. Some people use the phrase in the doctrine of double effect, either one works. So this is a principle that guides a person caught in a situation where both good and evil effects may result from a single action. So there's a distinction to be made between a directly willed effect and an indirectly willed effect. Now, a directly willed effect is an effect of an action that is foreseen and intended. So you act and you foresee the consequences of your act and you intend those consequences, right? So if someone is hurt and you give them medication, you foresee that it will make them better, and that's intended. Okay, so there's nothing wrong with that. Directly willed effect is something straightforward. Now, an indirectly willed effect is a case where you take an action, the consequences or the effects are foreseen but not intended, right? So you take a particular action, and what the consequences that follow, you know they're going to happen, they're inevitable, but you don't intend for them to happen, especially if they're evil, right? They're bad. You don't mean for them to happen. You sort of hope they don't happen, but you know in fact that it will happen. So perhaps an example we could use is the amputation example. You see someone's leg is, you're skilled. You see someone's leg is infected, and the infection is spreading, and you decide to save the person, and you amputate the leg. So what you can foresee that that person is no longer going to have the use of that leg, and it's going to cause them immense pain, and there's going to be a lot of collateral sort of harms that would follow this particular act, right? So those things, the evil effects are foreseen, but they are not intended. You don't want them to have any collateral pain or the negative effects that come from the amputation. They're foreseen, but they're not intended. So the principle of double effect spells out the conditions under which an indirectly willed evil, at least not imputable to the agent. That means, so when can you say it's okay to do an action in which this indirectly willed evil effect, or when can we say we're not going to hold you morally responsible for that particular action? All right, so there are basically four steps here. So the first thing is that the moral object may not be evil in itself. That means what you're doing, the action itself, cannot be intrinsically evil. So torture, rape are good examples of that, right? So for instance, with torture, you might say, hey, I'm going to torture this person, but yet look, it yielded some important information, right? That's unacceptable because the moral object is evil. That's intrinsically evil. So, in a case where an action is intrinsically evil, that means that it's physically, and the physical actions on the objective scale are evil, and there's no amount of circumstances or intention that can actually justify this. So it's intrinsically evil in that sense. Um, it if that's the case, then it's a hard no. You can't use the principle of double effect in that situation. Now, the second thing is that the good and evil effect must proceed at least equally directly from the act itself, right? So the immediate effect must not be solely evil. That means when you act, the action that must not result in something evil, right? The good effect should not physically result from the evil effect. So it shouldn't be a case that you do something which results in something evil, and then that evil thing then sequentially produces something good, right? That's never acceptable. So if we look at this diagram here, this would be an example of this. This is, so I have the X here to indicate this is exactly what you should not do, right, for the principle of double effect to count, right? So your act should not result in an evil effect, which then results in a good effect, right? That's the principle of double effect does not offer any moral justification in that circumstance. Now, this is sort of a rough diagram for how the principle of double effect should work, right? So, what you make an action or you act, and what's happening is that there's a good effect. This is a good effect that comes from your action, but there's also an immediate evil effect. So the good and the evil effect come immediately and equally your from your act, right? It's not a case that it's sequential. It's not that you act first, something evil happens, but then eventually something good comes about from that, right? So it can't be that you torture, you act to inflict pain, which is torture, and you get actionable intelligence, and therefore everything's justified. No, right? So um, the act must produce a good effect. An evil effect has to come at the same time. Now, the third step is that the agent, the person acting, may not intend or approve the evil effect, right? So if we go back to this diagram, that means the person who is acting may not intend or approve the evil effect, right? So you know it's foreseen, you know it's coming, but you cannot secretly intend for that evil effect, right? Your intent must be for the good effect solely, primarily, only, right? You can't have any sort of double intent there. So it has to be that you intend to do good, and the evil is just this collateral double effect that you foresee it coming, but you can't. It's inevitable. Okay, and so the agent may not intend to approve the evil effect. So sometimes people give the example of morphine, which you can give to relieve pain. But then if you somehow are sort of a really crooked person and you hope that it results in the person's death because maybe they get too much or their blood pressure is too low and it has a negative effect, then your intent was not to heal them. You had a secret intent to harm them, right? So the principle of double effect doesn't work there. So again, the agent cannot intend or approve an evil effect. And then there must be a proportionate grave reason in order to allow the evil effect. So if the evil effect is slight, then a slight reason suffices. If the evil effect is serious, then a serious reason is required to justify action. So again, what's saying that the good effect and the evil effect must be proportional, right? So if you want to achieve something good, um, then and there is an evil double evil effect, then you have to ask is whatever you're achieving the good thing is it just does it justify this evil you're allowing? Okay, so very often people use the example of ectopic pregnancies. So this is where the blastocyst gets stuck or implants in the fallopian tube, and so if it begins to grow, it'll rupture the tube and cause the death of the mother, right? So in those cases, then you have a situation of conflict, which is that a pregnancy is going to result in the mother's death, and so what do you do? Well, the easy way would be to say, well, let's go ahead and abort the baby, but then that would be intrinsically evil, right? To cause the death of another human being. Um, and so in that case, what people have suggested is that the act is to then perform a surgery on the mother, which removes a certain part of the fallopian tube. And so the intent is to provide good health and save the mother's life. Okay, the foreseen but unintended effect is that the unborn child is going to die because you're removing the fallopian tube around the blastocyst, um, the very early conceived human, and that's going to result in the death of the baby. So the question then is this proportional? Well, the argument that it's proportional is because the good effect is that you're saving the mother's life, right? And the evil effect is that the unborn child is going to die. So this would be that's often used as an example of how the principle of double effect is used. And so again, it's that one has to act with the intent to do good. The evil effect is foreseen, um, but unintended, and the good effect and evil effect must be proportional. There has to be a good enough, sufficient enough reason to allow for this evil effect. So undertaking an action from which a good and evil effect are foreseen is permissible if the action itself is not evil, if the bad effect is not intended, and if there's sufficiently great reason to permit the evil effect. Okay, so the principle of double effect is used for situations of conflict, precisely when one, you have to act to do good, but there's an evil effect that follows. And by the way, um, just war theory very much deals with the principle of double effect, right? It's very much about one must act, the intent must be to act to do something good. And then you have to ask yourself, make sure you are not intending harm, and if the evil effect and the good effect are proportionate. Okay, so that is the principle of double effect, which is used to handle many principles of situation and situations of conflict.